In the previous lesson, we looked at factoring by factoring out the greatest common factor. Today, we're going to look at another type of factoring. So we are going to be factoring polynomials when three things are true. The first item is that the degree is going to be 2. Now, if you can recall, I've told you that a second degree polynomial has a special name, and that is a quadratic. Okay, now the second stipulation that we're going to look at today is that it's going to be a 3-term polynomial. So the number of terms will be 3. And a 3-term polynomial is called a trinomial. So we're going to be looking at a trinomial that is a quadratic. And the last thing that we're going to be looking at today is where the leading coefficient is 1. Now, the leading coefficient won't always be 1, but just for today, we're going to look at where it's only 1. It's a little bit simpler, and this is going to be one of those polynomials that it'll be quick to factor once you learn how. Okay, so we're going to look at the simple cases today. So the first thing I need you to do is I need you to recall. Remember when we multiplied 2 binomials together? So we're going to be distributing these to multiply. So we would do the x times the x, which would be x squared. Then we would do the x times the 2, which is 2x. We would then do 3 times x, which is 3x. And lastly, we would do 3 times 2, which is 6. And this would give us a trinomial once we added our like terms together. So this right here would have been our answer. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take this trinomial here and we're going to go backwards. We're going to go back to where it started. What were we multiplying together to get this answer? Now before we do that, I want to show you a graphic organizer for multiplying. And the reason we need this is because when it comes to factoring, there's no shortcuts. It's guessing and it's checking. And so if we have an easy way to re-multiply it out to help us guess and check, it's very helpful. So on the second product, I'm going to be multiplying the same 4 numbers. I'm still going to do x times x. I'm still going to be doing this I'm still doing x times x. I'm going to be doing the negative 2 times the x, the 1 times the x, and so on. Every term is going to get multiplied the same way I did in the first problem. But I'm going to draw my arrows a little different. So I'm still going to do x times x, which is x squared. So we're going to write that down, x squared. Instead of taking my x to my 1 up to the top, I'm going to bring it down below. X times 1, which is 1x. Okay, and notice I'm not writing it down here with my x squared because my final answer is what I'm going to write down there. So then I'm going to multiply my negative 2 times x, but again, instead of taking it to the top, I'm going to multiply it on the bottom. So negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Okay, and then finally, I'm going to do my negative 2 times my 1, but this time I'm going to take it to the top. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. So in my trinomial here, I can already see my middle term is going to be negative 2 plus 1, which is negative x. And then again, I had negative 2 times 1, which is negative 2. So again, this is simply a graphic organizer for organizing my multiplication. And it's important because I need these bottom terms to help me figure out if I'm going to be multiplying correctly or not. And so, I don't know if you noticed, but this graphic organizer kind of looks like a little man. Draws little eyes there. He's got his little smile. So it's kind of like a little man organizer. So let's look at the last one. We're going to do x times x, which is x squared. We're then going to do x times negative 3, which is negative 3x. I'm then going to do negative 4 times x, which is negative 4x. And then finally, I'm going to do negative 4 times negative 3, which is positive 12. So my constant is positive 12. My middle term is going to be the sum of negative 4x and negative 3x, which is negative 7x. So this is my trinomial. Okay, so now hold on to that because we're going to need that to factor. So down here, we're going to look at the steps for factoring success. So the very first thing you should always do is factor out your greatest common factor. So looking here at my example, at 2x squared plus 14x plus 24, hopefully you notice that our greatest common factor is 2. So after yesterday's lesson, you should know that this would factor out into 2 times x squared plus 7x plus 12, because I'm dividing a 2 out of each of these terms. Now, yesterday you would have just left it as this, but today we're going to continue factoring this expression right here. So to do this, the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to set up your parentheses. So I'm going to be factoring x squared plus 7x plus 12. So I'm going to set up a set of 2 parentheses. And that's because if you notice at the top here, whenever I had a trinomial, I started with multiplying 2 binomials. These are both linear terms that created this quadratic. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with 2 factors. I know there's 2 of them, and they're both going to be binomials. Now what those binomials are is a mystery. So here's what we have to figure out. Now the first thing I know is that x squared is made up of x and x. And notice in every problem at the top here, when I multiplied my first term, x times x, I had x squared. So my first part of my binomial is x times x, and that would give me the x squared. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to look at our signs. And this is very important because they're going to help us determine what we need to do. So if I have 2 positive signs, okay, we always start by looking at the second sign. So if the second sign is positive, this means we're going to have the same signs in our factor. And the reason this is because when I get my last term, okay, notice up here, when I did 3 times positive 2, that gave me positive 6, my constant. When I did negative 4 times negative 3 on this third problem, it gave me positive 12. So when you're multiplying those last terms together, a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So the second term, the second sign, says that the signs are going to be the same. And then you look to the front. So I look at this positive sign, and that tells me they're both going to be positive. Okay, so the second case, again, we're looking at the second sign is a positive. That tells me they're going to be the same sign. And when I look to the front, they're both going to be negative signs. Because the only way to get a negative product in the middle is if they were both negatives. Okay, and then the very last scenario is where the constant is negative. And if the constant is negative, this means the signs are going to be different. Because the only way to multiply to get a constant that's negative is if you're doing a plus times a minus. Now, when you look at the front here, this will tell you which bigger number takes the sign. So the bigger number is going to take the sign of whatever is there, whether it's a plus or a minus. Okay, so if you don't quite understand those sign rules yet, don't worry, we'll get there. So looking back up here, our polynomial x squared plus 7x plus 12, the second sign right here is positive. So since that second sign is positive, that means my signs are going to be the same. So now I have to look to the front. Because the first sign is also positive, that means both of my signs are going to be positive. Okay, because the only way I can multiply my last two numbers and get a positive here, and the only way I can add those numbers to get a positive is if they're both positives. So now that we have our x's and we have our signs, the next step is to list your factors of c. So looking up here, my c is going to be 12. So all my factors of 12 are 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. So what we're going to do is we need to figure out, because we're multiplying these two numbers to get 12, which of these factors is going to multiply to get 12 but add up to 7. So we're just going to start at the beginning, and I recommend using pencil for this, especially because you're going to be doing a lot of erasing. So let's say I started with 1 and 12. So if I put a 1 here and a 12 here, and I use my graphic organizer, notice the middle terms, that's 1x, and this is 12x, and that adds up to 13x. Well, there's a little bit of problem there because we need a 7x. So that means this factor was incorrect. We can't use 1 and 12. So I simply erase those factors and we try a new one. So if I was to try 2 and 6, 2 times x is 2x, 6 times x is 6x, and those add up to be 8x. Again, that didn't work because I need a 7x in the middle. So 2 and 6 do not work. So again, erase. So I'm going to try my last set of factors, which is 3 and 4. So 3 times x is 3x, 4 times x is 4x, and that adds up to be 7x. That's what I needed. I needed 7x. So I have now found the factors that multiply to equal 12, but add up to equal my 7x middle term. So now the last step is to put it all together. So I have to bring down this factor of 2. This was my greatest common factor. We can't lose him. So I have 2 times x plus 3 times x plus 4. Okay, now the last step is always very important. Check your factors by distributing. Make sure it works. And you can use that little graphic organizer to double check. X times x is x squared. 3 times 4 is 12. 3x plus 4x is 7x. I've gotten all three of my middle terms here, x squared plus 7x plus 12. And then if I was to multiply it by 2, I would have 2x squared plus 14x plus 24. So that means this answer is correct. These are my factors that I originally multiplied to get this answer. Okay, so now we're going to look at some problems on the back. Okay, so there's a couple of things you need to remember when you're doing this. The first thing that you need to remember is that there is only one answer. Okay, so that's what we're going to write in this first box. There is only one answer that will be factored completely. So there's not multiple answers here. However, the order of the factors doesn't matter, with the exception of the greatest common factor, which should always be in the front. So we're going to write that down here in the next box. The order of the factors except the GCF Doesn't matter. So commutative property is still in effect here. Okay, so back up here on this example, x plus 3, x plus 4, it doesn't matter if you have 2 times x plus 4 and then x plus 3. The only thing that does matter is that the GCF should always be in the front, the greatest common factor. So let's look at some smaller problems so they can get a little bit better of a hang of this. So number 1, we're going to have x squared plus 8x plus 15. So step 1 is to check to see if there's a greatest common factor. And there is not a greatest common factor. So that makes this a little bit easier than the last problem we did. So the second step is to draw your parentheses. Okay. Now remember, x squared is x times x. The second step is to look at your signs. So if we start with our second sign, which is positive, that tells me that the signs are the same, and then I'm going to look to the front. Both of my signs are going to be positive. Okay, now the next thing is to list all the factors of my C. So C is 15, so my factors are going to be 1 times 15 and 3 times 5. So I don't have quite as many factors, and remember, you know you're done because we've reached around to 5. So there's only 4 factors, and we're going to try them. We can try them individually, or you might already can see it. Sometimes you can see it very quickly. Now I will give you a tip here. I typically start with the smallest factors and work my way up to the bigger factors, especially if I know the middle term is small. 8 is small. 1 and 15 aren't going to add up to 8. So when I plug in my factors here, I'm going to start with 3 and 5. Okay, and then I'm going to check. 3 times x is 3x. X times 5 is 5x. That adds up to 8x. So that's a check. And then I'm going to double check the rest of it matches. X times x is x squared. And 3 times 5 is 15. Check, check. So this I know is factored correctly. So now all I have to do is write my answer. X plus 3 times x plus 5. Or you could have written it as x plus 5 times x plus 3. The order does not matter for factoring, as long as you have both factors written down correctly. So let's try number 2. X squared minus 2x minus 24. So first step is to write our parentheses. Second step is to look at our x squared. So x squared factors into x times x. We're going to look at our signs now. So the second sign is a negative. So a negative means they're going to be different. Okay, now that means we just need a plus and a minus. Now one thing that we do want to look forward to the front is that my bigger sign, my bigger number is going to be a negative. That's the only way I can get a negative middle term. So this next thing we're going to do is look at our factors of 24. So there's a lot of factors of 24. We got 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. So we're going to have to be very careful with which ones we pick. Again, I tend to like to start at the bottom. I'll probably start with 4 and 6. So I'm going to plug a 6 in here and a 4 in here. Now when I check this, 6 times x is positive 6x, and x times negative 4 is negative 4x. And that's going to add to positive 2x. Now that's pretty close to what I need, but not close enough. I need a negative. So I have simply switched my signs around here. I've made this incorrect. And notice, remember I said the bigger number should have the negative? 6 is bigger than 4. I should have put the 6 in place of the 4. So I'm simply going to erase my 6 and my 4, and I'm going to switch them around. So now, 4 times x is positive 4x, and x times negative 6 is negative 6x, which is going to give me a negative 2x. So I've got my middle term, and then again I'm going to double check. X times x is x squared, and 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. So my factors are going to be x plus 4 times x minus 6. All right, let's look at number 3. So number 3 is going to be x squared plus 6x minus 27. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our factors. So we need our parentheses. We're going to have two binomials. Remember, x squared is x and x. So if we look at our signs, we start with the second sign. We start with our constant. It's the one that tells us the most information. It's a negative, so my signs are going to be plus and minus, different signs. Next, we write our factors of 27. So 27 is 1 times 27. Whoa, whoops, sorry about that. And 3 times 9. And then that would be it. So we've only got 2 factor pairs to pick from. And we need to add up to 6. So the closest one that's going to get me to 6 is 9 and 3. So because this time my sign here is positive, so that I don't have to do as much guessing and checking, I can kind of think ahead. So looking back here, I need a positive 6, which means my bigger number, my 9, needs to be positive. My smaller number is going to be negative. Now again, I'm always going to check this. That's positive 9x. That's negative 3x. And that adds up to 6x, which is what I needed. X times x is x squared. 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. So the better you are at multiplying, the quicker you're going to be at this. If you're not good at multiplying, that's okay. You can train yourself to get better. It's just going to take a little more time than someone who's already good at it. So what I want you to do now is I want you to try the next 2 problems. So on here, number 4 is going to be x squared minus 5x plus 6. And number 5 is going to be x squared minus 5x minus 6. Now, these may look the same, but they are not. Their signs are not the same. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video, factor both of these, and when you're ready to go over them, turn the video back on. So the answer to number 4 is x minus 2 times x minus 3. So these signs are going to be the same. Now on number 5, the factors are not going to look like this. So if you got number 4 correct, once again, put a little smiley face in the box. If you didn't get it correct, put a little frowny face in the box so that we can go over it tomorrow. All right, so the answer to number 5 is x minus 6 times x plus 1, or you could have x plus 1 times x minus 6. Now notice we got very different factors, even though these problems look very similar. The only thing that was different about these was the second sign. So this is why it's so important to pay attention to those details. That one little negative sign and that one little positive sign completely changed our factors, because one factor needed to have 2 negatives and one set of factors had to have opposite signs. So you've got to pay attention to those sign rules. You've got to pay attention to what your middle term is adding up to be. Okay, so number 6. I want you to try number 6 now. Well, yes, I want you to try number 6. Oops. X squared plus 3x plus 1. So when you're ready to go over this, Unpause the video. All right, as you are working this problem, you probably came up to a little problem. The only factors of 1 are 1 times 1. And no matter how hard we try, our signs are going to be the same. We will never get 1x and 1x to add up to 3x's. Now you might think I made a mistake. I didn't. Not everything is factorable. So this doesn't work. Okay, and because this doesn't work, that means that this polynomial is prime. So prime simply means that it will not factor. Okay, so this did not work. Some things are not factorable. And eventually you'll learn ways how to get the factors without factoring it. But for right now, we only know factoring. So if you ever come up against one of these and you've tried every combination, nothing's working, then you say it's prime. Now, some students give up too soon. So they try a 1 or 2 factors and they forget about 1. So it's important that you always make a list of the factors so that you can make sure you're checking every single pair. Once you've exhausted all the options, then you can say that it's prime. All right, so let's look at number 7. So this one's going to be 2x squared minus 10x minus 48. So right off the bat, this looks different because we have a number in front of x squared. So at this moment, that should be a clue to you that we have a greatest common factor. So 2x squared, 10x, and 48 are all divisible by the number 2. So we're going to factor out 2, and then we're going to write down what's left over. So x squared minus 5x minus 24. I'm taking a 2 term out of each of those. So basically dividing a 2 out. So now we're going to take and we're going to factor the rest of this. So we're going to simply bring down the 2. Okay, we'll use him at the end. He's just hanging around for right now. And then we're going to create our 2 binomials. And the only thing we're looking at to factor this is what's in my orange, this parentheses. So I'm looking at 24. I need to write all the factors of 24. So we have 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. Now, you might get sick of writing them. I don't care. You need to write them so you remember to check all the options. If you can see it immediately, that's awesome. But there are some that even Miss Miller has to sit down and write down all the factors to find the ones that work. Okay, so you might have to do this a lot. So we have x times x. We're going to take a look at my signs. They're going to be different. Okay, so I'm going to have plus and minus. And now I'm going to have to start guessing and checking to find 5. So I normally start at the bottom, so 4 and 6. So that gives me positive 4x, and that gives me negative 6x. That does not add up to negative 5. So that was not the right set of factors. That wasn't even close to 5. So now I'm going to try 3 and 8. So 3 and 8. So 3 times x is 3x. X times negative 8 is negative 8x. And that adds up to negative 5x. So I have my factors. X times x is x squared. 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. So my answer here is going to be 2 times x plus 3 times x minus 8. Alright, so let's try another one. 4x squared minus 12x minus 40. So the first thing we want to do is factor out our greatest common factor. So 4x squared, 12x, and 40. The GCF is going to be 4. And then we're going to write down what's left over. So we take a 4 out of x squared. We have x squared left. 4 times what gives me negative 12x? Well, that's negative 3x. and 4 times negative 10 would give me negative 40. So now, remember, we're only looking at what's inside the parentheses here. We're going to factor that. So we're going to simply bring down the 4, write our factor pairs. So x times x is going to be x squared. Looking at our signs here, that's a minus, so that means they're different. So plus and minus. And then I need factors of 10. So I have 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. So hopefully you're starting to kind of think ahead on these. 1 and 10 aren't going to add up to 3. 2 and 5 can. And because it's negative 3, my 5 really needs to be negative. And my 2 needs to be positive. And then I'm always going to double check. 2x, negative 5x. That adds up to negative 3x, which is what I wanted. X times x is x squared. And that equals negative 10. So I know my factors are correct. So my answer is 4 times x plus 2 times x minus 5. Okay, and again, it doesn't matter the order. It can be x minus 5 times x plus 2. The only one that does matter is that the GCF should be in the front. So last one I want you to try on your own. This is going to be 3x squared plus 27x plus 42. So when you're ready, turn the video on to check your answer. All right, so the answer to number 9 is 3 times x plus 2 times x plus 7, or you could have 3 times x plus 7 times x plus 2. Both of these answers are equally correct. The only thing is that we like the greatest common factor to be at the front.